website and use those analytics to improve your website. We see too often decisions about websites that are made on instinct and on personal preferences. And I would always argue that there's a place for that instinct, but sometimes we often need that objective, fact-based information to help us make a wise decision, or help us understand what's really going on with our websites, particularly when maybe there are other stakeholders who don't always share the same opinion as us. So today's session is about how we get those facts, how we get that information, and how we can use that to make improvements to the website. As I'm sure you know, the internet is constantly collecting data and evidence. Some might feel there's too much data that they're collecting, and maybe that's a topic for another webinar. But there are many tools out there, not just the obvious ones, that help us interpret that data and turn that into analytics that we can use. And we're going to pick up on a few of those today. So my next question in the chat box, maybe you can share the tools that you are using to get information about your website, the tools that you're using at the moment. So yeah, I'm guessing most of you will know the obvious one. So if someone maybe put that one, thank you. Natalie, HubSpot and Google Analytics. Sam, yeah, Google Analytics mainly. Hotjar, yes, I'm going to touch on Hotjar maybe if you've got time. Uber Suggest, that's not one I've used before, so maybe you can pick up on that in the question and answer session later. So, but mainly most of you are putting Google Analytics, so thanks for sharing that. Oh, Facebook Analytics, that's a great one, yeah. And the sales of the company, absolutely, yes. There's all those sorts of things as well that we can use to indicate how our website is going. Spectrix, yeah, and that's the, for those of you who don't know, that's a ticket system. Hootsuite, yeah, and social media analytics as well. So keep adding those in as I carry on. So today, I'm very excited that joining me is presenting his first webinar for HdK is our web support developer, Yannick. Yannick is HdK's resident problem solver, so it's great that he is here today. He's also done one-to-one training with our clients. In fact, Nathan, who's in the room here today, has had that training recently. Before we get started, just to remind you, we want you to be as interactive as you can today, and that's why today we're going to try out a couple of breakout rooms and see if we can get a bit more interaction going. But you're already a very interactive group with you just looking at the chat room, so please keep that up. Thank you very much. What else do I need to remind you of before we get cracking? 60-minute session. We'll have Q&As throughout, so just put your Q&As in questions in the chat box, and if we can answer it there and then we will do. Otherwise, we'll try and come back to it at a later point. And if we don't get an answer, we'll in today's session we'll put it into the write-up that goes on the website either later today or tomorrow. So as I said, we're going to have 2 breakout sessions. While we're talking, Freya, who's in the room, is going to try and sort of assign you to 2 rooms, and we'll take one. So finally, last question before we get cracking. In the chat room, can you say what you would like to get out of this session? So that we've got an idea of what you're hoping to get, and we can make sure that we can try and cover it today in this session. So if there's something that you specifically want to get out, or what's the reason for you signing up to this session, if you put it into the chat room, we'll try and pick that up. Thank you, Nathan. That's a good question, and shows the level of your knowledge here. So that's really helpful. Thank you. So the things that we are covering today is how to measure your website's performance, and we're going to pick out one and focus on one in particular. I thought it'd be useful to talk about where your audiences are coming from. So what can we use, and here I'll use Google Analytics mainly to look at what reports are there that you can, that tells you where your audience come from. And then Yannick's going to pick up on how to monitor the success of a marketing campaign. We advertise it as a marketing campaign, but as we were talking and planning for this, we realized it's more about website improvements using Google Analytics. So we'll definitely cover those things. I'm just going to have a look through the things that you're putting here. A bit of help with Google Ads would be great. Let's try and pick that up in the question and answers at the end. So I'll make sure we leave enough time for that. Google Analytics 4, backlinks on Ahrefs, refresher on best practices and getting most from analytics, and to listen to the most important parts of analytics to focus on the Google Ads to help. Ads for sure, gosh, that's a really popular one. Maybe we need to do a whole separate webinar on Google Ads, and that's something that Phoebe can come back in, and Freya as well. Would anyone know how to find the code in Google Analytics to add to my Weebly site? Gosh, that's a good question. Improving SEO with the results of Google Analytics, basics of analyzing sales, and better using analytics when you're not as comfortable with it as you'd like to be. That's great. Improve content, so yeah, we're definitely covering that. So there's a lot of things there. It's only an hour session, so there's a sort of a limit to what we can cover, but we'll hopefully cover some of those things for you today. So without that, I think it's best that I pass over to Yannick quickly so that we can get through the main stuff and then leave enough time for questions.
Great, thank you, Hans. Welcome, everyone. I'm Yannick. As Hans put it, I'm the resident problem solver here. I'm really looking forward to going through this webinar with you. And as Hans mentioned, it's my first one. So I'm starting with how to measure your website's performance. So what I thought to start with, to open with, is just, again, to put into the chat box, different kind of performance indicators, different kinds of performance that we could measure or could be interesting to measure. I'll go for a couple, but I think just to open, we've got a couple already on the screen. So different types of performance, I'm just going to go through them. So visitors. So how many people are coming to your website as an indicator of performance. Conversions. So I saw someone was talking about sales figures. So for instance, how many people are buying the product, basically, if you are selling. SEO, so this is to do with where you're ranking on a search engine. Achieving specific company goals. So always you set up your website for a reason, and then are you hitting that reason? For instance, if you set up a website for a specific tour, if you're doing a dance tour, and you want that tour to reach a certain audience, say the Northeast, are you hitting that? And then speed, so to do with how quickly is your website loading. So just to go through why could these why is this performance important? So visitors, are you reaching enough of your audience? Yeah, I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Are you hitting enough? Conversions, are you hitting your sales goals if you are using conversions and e-commerce goals? SEO, if you have poor SEO, it can lead to your website being hard to find. So obviously better performance will then, better SEO then leads to the search being better and people finding your website organically easier. The specific company goals, again, as I just mentioned, you set it up for a reason. Are you hitting that reason? And then speed, long wait times lead to user drop-off. I'm sure we've all done it where we've had either poor internet or a website has been running very slowly. So you know what, we just leave it and we'll come back another time. And then a lot of the time you just forget to come back. So today I want to talk a little bit more about speed. So in a website terms, what kind of things affect website speed? So I'll just go through a couple of them. So in terms of website speed, the actual website itself, what kind of things affect the website speed? So the first one being website file size. So this is basically how big the files are that are used to create the website. Features. So this, I'm going to say that's any extra functionality on the website. So like a slider or like a gallery or a specific pop-up or anything that's kind of outside what you would call a normal website. Normally things that move will be a feature, unless it's animations. Animations is a little bit, it's a little bit between the two. When more talking about heavy duty features, I'll go through a little bit more as I go through. Image size. So websites use a lot of images. How big are those images? The number of unique fonts on the website. So if you use a lot of fonts, you're going to have to load in a lot of data. And then server capacity. So this links to where your website is hosted. So you will have a hosting package. And if you're using up a lot of that server capacity, it'll slow down the website. Things that will impact your server capacity is if anybody is signing up or having memberships or these kind of things where they need to store data on the website. So again, it's important to store that data. Just how big is your server to be able to store it? So I want to show you a tool that we use to measure website speed. I'll share this screen. So this is a website called tools.pingdom.com. And it's great at measuring just the speed of your website. So I've put in wearehdk.com into the website speed test. I ran the test, and it comes up basically with a performance and a couple of indicators. It can be a bit overwhelming when you first see it, but we'll go through it a little bit and demystify it a little bit. So on this one, basically you can see it gives you a performance grade. This is out of 100. It shows you the total page size, how quickly it took to load, and the amount of requests that go on it. So in actual fact, even though it's quite a large website, page size 2.3 megabytes, it actually loaded very quickly. This part here is more for developers, and even though it's giving these kind of grades, it's not as clear cut exactly how quickly this will send for making a change here will actually improve performance. The part that I'm really interested in is this part here. So content size by content type. So on the We Are HdK website, you can see that half of the website is made up from images in terms of its file size. I want to just point out scripts. Scripts is what we use normally to create extra functionality on the website. So this is kind of the extra features. I've got that little pop-up bar at the top, so it's difficult to get behind. To get to the other tab. Anyway, I'll do it over here. So we are HdK.com. So once I've had a look at this, what I'll do is I'll come to the website and have a look at the website. So you can see that images are actually a very key part of the website. What it's using to basically showcase what we're doing, and then putting the blogs. So then I would want to check to see on a load how it's loading, and as you can see, it's kind of loading bit by bit. So this is what we call lazy loading. So in fact, even though there's quite a large image size, what we've done is we use techniques like lazy loading in order to make it so that it loads quicker, which is why you get a quick load time on the rest of the website, but then this kind of loads after. And another thing we've done is that we then host another page where you can see more of the images. So we've got a quick load time on the home page. So in terms of action points, in terms of like creating the website, that's what we've done. In terms of what I would want to do is see if there's any way to reduce the size of these images if we were wanting to improve the performance. So what I mean by that is that on the website, on internet, you don't really need super high resolution photos. You can get away with reducing the quality, which then changes the file size down, and you can still get the same effect. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there is ways of compressing images as well. One that I love using is this little panda one. It's called tinypng.com. You just pop your files in here and then you can reduce the image size. So when you're using images, you're already thinking about performance by making the images a little bit smaller in terms of their file size without affecting the quality of the website. Something I wanted to point out is that my question normally that I don't start with is how to eliminate this. It's more about matching this data to the website to see what's important. For instance, we could take off the images and it'll make the website load quicker, but then you're missing out a key part of the content, and actually it's a key part of the website. So the actual question that we're coming with is, how can we make this load faster?
Yannick, Natalie's got a pertinent question here. Is there a bulk way to make images smaller? Our website is very heavy with images.
It depends on where your images come from. Because if it's coming from a photographer, then they will have software that they can bulk update. This one is pretty good for, you can drag and drop these in and then just download them all as well. But there is an element of manual compression, let's say. You have to manually then put them into the website, if that makes sense.
I'm just using a WordPress. Is there a WordPress plugin that helps with that?
Yeah, great question. WordPress does do a little bit of optimization already without having to do anything. But there are plugins out there that will automatically compress your images and then before they even go onto the website. WordPress also does something where it won't allow you to upload really high image sizes. So, I mean, we are going to go into a breakout session, so maybe we can go in a bit more detail on your website, because I'd be interested to see the load speed. For instance, even though there's quite a lot of images on this website, it still loads very quickly. So there can be some things where we look into it a little bit more.
Right, thank you. And very quickly, before we go into that breakout session, Amy has asked about videos on your website. I guess the answer is that we normally encourage people to host them on platforms like Vimeo and YouTube. So it's not your server that's serving up that video. Is that the answer to that, or is there something else?
Yeah, exactly. That links to the hosting capacity, the server capacity. So if you're going for videos, but basically YouTube and Vimeo will do things where they'll minify your files for you and serve it up quickly. And they'll do things where they'll check the bandwidth of the person and reduce the quality. So basically, if you use videos, it's always a good idea to kind of lean on the tech giants because they're already doing a lot. But again, it depends on what you need your website for. But in general, Vimeo and YouTube will be able to do a lot of what you need. I want to show another website, just to illustrate a different report, let's say. So this one is called Happy as Larry Tour, and this one I just want to point out is a little bit of an older website. So it's got a 1.9 megabyte file size, and again, a large load time. So coming down to the content size by file, a content type, you can see that there's a higher script of an image. So just to remind, scripts is mainly what we use to create extra functionality on the website. So if I come to the website, which I believe is under here, then we can have a look. I would have a look to see what kind of features. So we've got this little slider here. We've got a little social feed here. And as well on, I believe it's on this page, we've got a little interesting, when you click this, it populates a new video in here. And you've got this slider thing here where that pops out like this. So these are kind of things that we're talking about with extra features. And basically, the way that the website's built is that we're using a couple of different frameworks to create those. And now that with technology always moving forward, we can use less frameworks. So we can create less, we can reduce the size of this if we needed to. For instance, this one has a very quick load time. So actually it's not such a big problem. But I just want to illustrate that with forward planning, you can plan the features to kind of sit together. When you add on a new feature, it's going to be adding on to that dependency that you've got there, which is not a problem. But if you did need to increase performance times, then it can be that we can try and minify the files and use the same frameworks. For instance, whenever I'm making a new Lightbox gallery, I always try to use what's already on the website, so I don't need to use anything extra, if that makes sense.
There's a couple of questions from Rachel, but I'm conscious of the time and wonder whether we should go into the breakout session, so you can have a look at you can share what you're thinking, and maybe we can pick up on Rachel's questions when we come back.
Yeah. I just seen your questions actually, Rachel. They're great. The breakout room task. So welcome. It's going to be our first experimental one. I'm really looking forward to this. So basically, we've put into the chat the Pingdom tool. Put the website that you're working with into the Pingdom tool. Have a look at the speed data that comes, or have a look at the data that comes from that report, and then have a look at the website and see if you can create any interpretations about your website speed. I'll go into one breakout room and Hans will go into another, and we can go through a couple of questions in more detail and maybe go through the report in more detail. It was great to go through in a little bit more detail on the rooms. I think some key things that we came up with was it's easier to kind of do the image enhancements and improvements as you go along. So making sure that you've got image sizes smaller, it's easier rather than having to go back and do them all in one go. Any kind of other takeaways that you had from your group, Hans?
Well, we spent a lot of time with Rachel, and I think one of the questions was there's so many things that you can do, and it tells you it's how do you decide which things to focus on, particularly for Rachel's website, and I think I was saying that there's not a right or wrong answer for that. You've got to make the decision between it's kind of understanding where things might be a problem, and then looking at the website and understanding whether you can lose those or sacrifice things there. So we discovered that Rachel had a lot of fonts on her website, a lot of plugins on her website. So that to me was the thing I would focus on. But yeah.
Great. So just to kind of wrap up the session, this part of the session, let's say, I just want to put some closing thoughts that if we go back to the slides, that as developers, there are a lot of things that we do as well to make sure that the website's loading quickly. So just to touch on a few of them, we use a lot of reusable templates, so that then the website only has to load the template once. We minify the file. So this is, I think, Rachel, you mentioned CSS. So we make sure the file is as small as possible. We use things to make the website that we don't need on the live website. So we have a development environment and then the live environment where we don't use those on them. Refactoring code is fun. We go back and make the code more efficient. We only use parts of frameworks that are needed for the functionality. And we try to use just a few frameworks for many features. But basically, I wanted to wrap up and say, you've made your website for a reason. So people come to your website. So it's a trade-off between feature and performance. So it's not about eliminating the features, but how can we serve those features in a good way, in a way that's quick for performance. For instance, the quickest app out there is called a Hello World app, and it's basically just text, but it's only text. So you're not, it's probably not hitting a lot of the indicators that you need. And it's a great example. It's like eating a plain barm cake. It's like eating a sandwich with no filling. It'll feed you, but it won't fulfill you. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Yannick. We'll come back to you shortly. As Yannick said, website performance isn't just measured in terms of speed. It's just one thing, just like you wouldn't measure the performance of a car on speed alone. And while website speed is clearly a topical and important factor that has direct influence on customers' experience and impressions, there are other considerations you may want to take into account when looking at analytics around your website's performance. So another indication of performance levels is how well is your website drawing in leads or your target customers that that the website can then convert into audiences or customers. So for this section, we're going to sort of really focus on Google Analytics, because it is the free and most commonly used tool out there, particularly amongst our clients. But there are many principles if you are looking at alternatives, because most of the sites can only collect a bit of basic information, and it's how they process this that for you, and in some cases what they can layer on top that sort of distinguishes them between the different systems. So I wonder if you can put in the chat a few other metrics from Google Analytics that you might use to help you understand where your customers are coming from. So let me get the chat so I can see what people are saying. Yeah, devices, yeah, that's a good one. So whether it's laptop, whether it's tablet or mobile or desktop. Source, yeah. Page sessions, geography session, time, yeah. So whether people are local, whether they're global. So other things that you might sort of indicate, yeah, acquisition, referrals. Great, and I'd love to know, yeah, email, that's an interesting one. UTMs, we will definitely cover UTMs and campaigns. So in order to do that, let's move on to the next slide. So I've just, for the purposes of people who are looking at the webinar after today and haven't, here are just a few things, and I'm particularly looking at where people are coming from. So I think one of you mentioned geography, so I put local and global. I put search engines, whether they come from Bing, and if they don't come from Google Analytics, have you got people who are sort of particular interesting group? Maybe that shows their technical levels. Referring websites, so has another website send people to you? You touched on pay-per-click, someone was talking about Google Ads earlier on, or organic, social media platforms, interest groups, there's a whole section on interest groups, that's quite interesting. Demographic segments, and marketing channels. Someone put in emails, and for example, but as well as email, you've got, mine's gone blank now, but you've got search engines, you've got websites, there's a various sort of marketing channels there, social. So in the breakout session that we're going to go back into, I want you to explore this time with your own site and company in mind. What are the changes you might want to make to your website that are based on real data that you can find on Google Analytics? So, so we'll discuss a number of options and agree one that you can share. Oh, no, forget that. So as an example, we're working with a client who promotes classical ensemble music. In response to the pandemic, they are planning streaming of concerts in 2021. However, they are very aware that their audience is maybe from older generations particularly. So we've been helping them with wireframing a microsite to display their streams, so something they didn't do before. We wanted to see what kinds of devices their audience typically used, whether it was desktop, mobile, or even tablets. Now, we make all of our websites work across all those devices. All your web developers will be doing that now, but there are ways that you might want to prioritize search and design features. So for example, we might have been thinking about a swipe mechanism to go through all of the different website streams. But that's something that works particularly well on tablets and mobile. But with their impression of their audiences, they weren't sure whether they were using tablets. So we went into Google Analytics, we looked at the devices report that Nathan mentioned, and we noticed that people were hardly using tablets at all. However, they did do a live stream concert just before Christmas, and when we went into that, just that single day when they were doing that concert, we noticed the use of tablets really increased. So I can imagine people sitting in their armchairs watching the concert on a tablet rather than sitting in their office at a desktop computer. So that gave us a bit of insight into where we could go with designs for that. So if we put the slides back on, Freya. So these are the reports So this is the question I want us to think about in the breakout rooms. Consider improvements you could make to your website and the Google Analytics report that you'll need for that. And I've come up with about five scenarios. So we're going to work in two teams. Yannick's going to take one team and I'm going to work out another team. And we're going to try and come up with, there's not necessarily one response. We're going to try and go through all six of those. And then when we've got those together as a group, and we can come back into the main room.
You've then done something to improve the performance, and then a question, did it work? So I want to show you a couple of different metrics that we've already had a look at, a couple of them in the breakout room, and through Hans's document as well. But I just want to show you a couple of them. So if we go to the next slide, I believe there should be a slide just to show a couple of them, or maybe not. Does everybody see? Oh, there we go. No. Okay, well, basically, I'll show you a couple of metrics. So one of them is, it is this actually, average time on page. The other one, where people are coming from. Did you improve something about where they're coming from? Did you do some sort of content strategy with someone? And UTM codes, which you touched on in my breakout room, about unique link tracking. So I just share my screen now. Hopefully it'll beat you out, Freya. Oh, there we go. So average time on page. So this is about what people are doing on the page. So if you come to overview, site content, all pages, you can see the average time on the page here. So if you improve something on the store, either improving the speed, the SEO ranking, the content strategy, and you see people are more on the web on that page, then you know something worked. So you can try and repeat it. I just want to note it's about finding consistent improvements. So it could be that it just happened to be that people came to that page a lot. So it's about continuously monitoring it and making sure it did improve. SEO improvements, so checking to see where people are coming from. So this will be where people are coming from. So acquisition, overview, and here you get a very quick overview of where people are coming from. So just to run through and quickly direct someone who's directly typed into your website, into the search bar. Other stuff that doesn't fit in, paid search, this is Google ads, when you've got a Google ad at the top. Display is something that's new and unique. Organic search is when someone searched for agency, web, London, and it comes up with We Are HdK. Affiliates is anyone you've paid. Referral is when someone clicks through on someone else's website, and social is coming from social media. I want to flag there's normally one here about email, but I don't have any email on Google. But this is not a good indicator. The email one doesn't have very good data, so it's better to use UTM codes. And UTM codes you see in here, campaigns, all campaigns. And basically you set up a unique URL. So you can put it at the bottom of a newsletter, on a specific button on a web page. And then when someone clicks on that web page, on that link, it'll pop up here as someone who's clicked on it. And you build that through something like this. And then you may need to shorten it because it's quite long sometimes. But they're just a couple of ideas of how you can measure whether it was whether it worked.
And Nathan makes a really good point about UTM building and making sure you have a really good naming convention, because once you start using this, you'll want to use it a lot, and you'll want to create lots of these links. So having a good naming convention is a great point. Thanks, Nathan. Right. So where does that get us to? So I think, wow, we we covered a lot, and there's so much more we could have covered, I realise. So thank you for sticking with us on this, and thank you for helping us with our breakout rooms. I think the thing with that Google Analytics is, but it's not just the only system out there, but and I wanted to talk a little bit more about Hotjar, but I covered that in one of our first webinars on our website, which you can access on our website, and maybe it's something to do in a future one. But we have some time for questions. Let's keep it to a couple of minutes, and then and Natalie, it's fine to go. Yeah, thank you for saying. No. So I wonder, we've already got a few questions in the chat box. Yannick, I don't know if you want to scroll through and see if there's any questions that you want to pick up on.
So yeah, the Bitly and firewalls emails. It's a good one. It's an interesting one, and it's always I can't think of the word, but where you have to kind of test it as you go, because basically you're going through a spam filter, and spam filters always hide how exactly they do the spam, so that spammers can't just bypass it. And links, images, files are the ones that get flagged up by spam. So one of the ways is to explicitly say it's a link in your email. Other ways, reducing how much, if you're doing any other content on it, checking to see if your email server is a good email server. I'm saying good in kind of quotations. For instance, like Google is quite a trusted one because it blocks sending more than 200 emails a month, these kind of things.
Right, and let's leave it there, Yannick. I think I've answered another question about heat maps in the chat box, and we'll definitely answer all the others on the website.